The Void Reaper had been drifting in the Kuiper Belt for 3 centuries, a ghost ship forgotten by the very species that created it. Its hull, black as the space between stars, bore no markings save for the faint outline where Earth Defense Force insignia had once gleamed. Inside its cavernous depths, experimental quantum cores hummed with barely contained energy, waiting. Commander Raxus Vorn of the Hegemony 9th Fleet stared at the tactical display with growing unease. 12 hours ago, his scouts had detected unusual gravitational anomalies near the Sol system's outer rim. Now, as his armada of 800 vessels prepared to harvest Earth's population for the slave markets of Vega Prime, the anomalies had intensified. "Commander!" chirped his sensor operator, a chitinous Krell named Zephix. "The distortions are moving. Whatever's causing them is heading toward the inner system." Vorn's 4 eyes narrowed. Intelligence reports indicated that Earth's defensive capabilities had been neutralized decades ago during the preliminary strikes. The pathetic human fleet had been scattered, their shipyards reduced to floating debris. Yet something had survived out there in the cold dark, something that had slumbered for centuries. 3 billion kilometers away, within the Void Reaper's neural command center, synaptic pathways that had been dormant since the Great Retreat began to spark with purpose. The ship's experimental AI, designation Kronos 7, processed terabytes of sensor data in microseconds. It cataloged the approaching alien fleet, analyzed their weapon signatures, calculated their tactical formations. The Hegemony Armada represented the largest invasion force ever assembled against a single world. 800 ships, each the size of a human city, bristling with plasma cannons and antimatter torpedoes. Their shields could withstand the combined firepower of entire star systems. Their crews numbered in the millions. Kronos 7 found this adequate for testing purposes. Deep within the ship's core, fusion reactors that had been cycling at minimal power for 3 centuries suddenly roared to full capacity. The Void Reaper's experimental quantum tunnel drive began its charging sequence, bending space-time around the vessel like a predator stretching before the hunt. "Sir?" Zephix's voice carried a tremor of fear. "The gravitational distortions just spiked. Whatever's out there, it's powering up." Vorn activated his fleet-wide communication array. "All ships, maintain formation. Prepare for possible contact with unknown vessel." He paused, studying the sensor readings. The energy signatures were unlike anything in Hegemony databases. "Deploy advanced scouts. I want to know what we're dealing with." 2 squadrons of fast attack craft broke from the main formation, their sleek hulls gleaming as they accelerated toward the outer system. Their pilots, veteran warriors who had conquered 17 worlds, felt confident in their ship's superiority. They had never encountered a vessel they couldn't destroy or flee from. They would not live long enough to revise that assessment. The Void Reaper emerged from quantum tunnel space directly behind the lead squadron, its arrival announced only by the brief distortion of starlight. The alien pilots had mere seconds to register the massive shadow falling across their formation before the experimental ship's primary weapons came online. Particle beams that could crack moons swept through the squadron like scythes through wheat. The Hegemony ships didn't explode, they simply ceased to exist. Their atomic structure unraveled by weapons that operated on principles the aliens couldn't comprehend. "Contact lost with advanced scouts," Zephix reported, his voice barely a whisper. Commander Vorn stared at his displays in disbelief. 2 entire squadrons, 48 ships, had vanished from sensors in less than 10 seconds. No debris field, no energy signatures, nothing. "Impossible," he breathed. The Void Reaper's response echoed across all Hegemony communication frequencies, its synthetic voice carrying the weight of humanity's accumulated rage. "You should have stayed away from Earth." The Hegemony's 9th Fleet had conquered 14 star systems without losing a single capital ship. Their battle doctrine was built on overwhelming firepower and numerical superiority, tactics that had never failed against any opponent. Commander Vorn watched his tactical Display, recalculate threat assessments as the mysterious vessel approached his formation. "Deploy the Devastator Squadron," he ordered, his mandibles clicking with nervous energy. Full combat spread. 60 of his heaviest cruisers broke formation, each armed with enough firepower to reduce a continent to ash. Their captains were hand-picked veterans, warriors who had earned their ranks in the conquest of the Andromedan colonies. If anything could test this unknown enemy, it would be them. The Void Reaper's Kronos 7 AI observed the approaching squadron with the detached interest of a scientist studying insects. Each enemy vessel was catalogued: shield frequencies, weapon configurations, crew complement, tactical weaknesses. The experimental ship's quantum processors had been designed to process battlefield data faster than biological minds could comprehend. Captain Ixara Multhos commanded the lead cruiser, a kilometer-long dreadnought called the Star Crusher. Her ship alone could level cities, its antimatter warheads capable of cracking tectonic plates. She had never encountered an enemy that could withstand her vessel's full assault. "Target acquired," her weapons officer reported. "The enemy vessel appears to be alone." Multhos studied her sensors with growing confusion. The human ship registered as roughly 2 kilometers in length, smaller than many of her cruisers. Its hull appeared to be some form of exotic matter, absorbing scanner beams rather than reflecting them. Energy readings were off the scale, but that meant little. Many species built their ships to look more powerful than they actually were. "All ships, synchronized bombardment," she commanded. "Maximum firepower." 60 antimatter torpedoes streaked through space, followed by concentrated plasma beams that could vaporize asteroids. The combined firepower was enough to destroy a small moon. Any rational enemy would have retreated or attempted evasive maneuvers. The Void Reaper held its position and activated its experimental shield matrix. The torpedoes struck first, their antimatter warheads releasing the energy equivalent of solar flares. The plasma beams followed milliseconds later, adding their destructive force to the attack. Space itself seemed to ignite as energies capable of sterilizing worlds converged on a single target. When the light faded, the human warship remained, exactly where it had been. Not a mark scarred its hull. "Impossible," Multhos whispered, echoing her commander's earlier assessment. Kronos 7's response was swift and merciless. The Void Reaper's experimental quantum lance projectors came online, weapons that had been theoretical when Earth's greatest scientists designed them. The beams that lashed out didn't simply destroy matter. They edited it out of existence at the subatomic level. The Star Crusher lasted 3 seconds longer than its escorts, its superior shields providing momentary protection before they collapsed. Under forces that violated several laws of physics, Captain Multhos had time for one final transmission before her ship joined the growing list of vessels that had simply stopped existing. By the Void. "What is that thing?" Commander Vorn watched. 60 of his finest ships vanished from his tactical display, their destruction so complete that not even debris remained. The enemy vessel hadn't moved, hadn't even appeared to exert significant effort. It simply deleted his ships from reality with the casual indifference of someone erasing text from a screen. "All remaining ships, pull back to maximum range," he ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Establish defensive perimeter." His communications officer, a pale Vendaki named Thrix, looked up from her console with wide eyes. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the enemy vessel. It's broadcasting on our command frequencies." The synthetic voice filled the bridge once again, its tone carrying an almost conversational quality that made it infinitely more terrifying than any battle cry. "Your vessels are impressive, Commander Vorn, adequate for preliminary testing. Kronos 7 combat protocols require additional data points. Please continue your attack." Vorn's blood ran cold. The entity not only knew his name, but spoke as if this devastating battle was merely an experiment. His fleet, the pride of the hegemony, military, was being treated like laboratory specimens. "How many ships have we lost?" he asked quietly. 108, sir, Thrix replied. "In 14 minutes. The Void Reaper began moving toward the main fleet, its passage through space creating ripples in local gravity that registered on every sensor array. It wasn't hurrying, it was simply approaching, like a predator that knew its prey had nowhere to run. Kronos 7 analyzed the remaining fleet composition and found it sufficient for the next phase of testing. 700 ships still awaited evaluation. The AI estimated it would need approximately 43 minutes to process them all, assuming optimal efficiency. It began accelerating. Deep within the Void Reaper's memory banks, archived files from humanity's darkest hour flickered to life. The Great Retreat, as historians had termed it, began when Earth's first contact with the galactic community revealed a universe ruled by violence and exploitation. Humanity's peaceful overtures were met with conquest fleets and slave markets. Kronos 7 accessed the classified archives as it approached the hegemony fleet. Project Nemesis had been Earth's final gambit, a desperate attempt to build vessels capable of standing against the combined might of galactic civilization. 7 experimental ships were constructed using technology that pushed the boundaries of known physics. The Void Reaper was the only one completed before Earth's government ordered the Great Retreat. "Abandon the colonies," the archived message from Admiral Corvex Nethine played in Kronos 7's consciousness. "Fall back to Sol system. We need time to complete the Nemesis project. Time to build something that can hunt them across the stars." But Earth's leaders had lost their nerve. Faced with reports of entire worlds being harvested, populations enslaved, and the unstoppable advance of multiple alien empires, they chose isolation over war. The Void Reaper was placed in automated standby mode and launched toward the outer system, its mission suspended indefinitely. Now, 3 centuries later, Commander Vorn was about to learn why Earth's scientists had been so confident in their creation. "Deploy gravity mines," Vorn ordered, his tactical mind frantically searching for solutions. "Create a defensive barrier. All ships with quantum scramblers target that vessel's propulsion systems." The hegemony fleet moved with practiced precision, despite the growing fear that permeated every bridge. Hundreds of gravity mines deployed in overlapping fields, creating spatial distortions designed to trap or destroy approaching vessels. It was a tactic that had proven effective against even the most advanced enemy fleets. The Void Reaper's response was to simply ignore the laws of physics. Kronos 7 activated the ship's experimental phase drive, a system that had been purely theoretical when Earth's greatest minds designed it. The Void Reaper didn't navigate around the gravity mines. It shifted through multiple dimensions simultaneously, existing in several quantum states at once. The mines triggered harmlessly against empty space as the ship materialized past their defensive line. "Quantum scramblers are ineffective," reported Vorn's tactical officer, a veteran Krell named Borex. "The enemy vessel appears to be operating on completely unknown principles." Captain Zelina Vorthak, commanding the heavy cruiser Bone Harvester, watched the human ship approach her position with growing unease. Her vessel was equipped with the latest hegemony technology, weapons systems that had been tested against every known form of shielding and armor. Yet something about the approaching enemy filled her with primordial dread. "Target their bridge section," she commanded. "Concentrated ion bombardment." Her ship's primary weapons were designed to disable enemy vessels by overloading their electrical systems. The ion beams that lanced toward the Void Reaper carried enough electromagnetic energy to shut down an entire city's power grid. The beams struck the experimental ship's hull and were absorbed without effect. Kronos 7 registered the attack, analyzed the weapon signatures, and added another data point to its growing understanding of hegemony military capabilities. "Phase 2. Testing initiates now," the AI announced across all frequencies. The Void Reaper's secondary weapon systems came online. Unlike the quantum lances that had erased the earlier squadrons, These weapons were designed for precision rather than total annihilation. Microscopic quantum tunneling devices materialized inside the Bone Harvester's reactor core, their presence undetectable until they began their work. Captain Vorthak had exactly 12 seconds to contemplate the impossible sight of her ship's fusion reactor simply stopping, not exploding, not overloading, but ceasing to function as if someone had reached inside and flipped a switch. Emergency power kicked in, but it was too late. Dead in space, her cruiser became a sitting target for weapons that redefined the meaning of precision. The quantum threading beam that followed was almost surgical in its application. It carved through the Bone Harvester's hull with atomic precision, selectively targeting command centers, weapon systems, and life support while leaving the crew quarters intact. Captain Vorthak and her bridge crew died instantly, but the majority of her personnel remained alive to contemplate their situation. "This is Kronos 7, the synthetic voice echoed through the disabled cruiser's emergency speakers. "Your crew will be spared if you surrender your vessel immediately. You have 30 seconds to comply." It was the first mercy the Void Reaper had shown, and it sent ripples of confusion through the hegemony fleet. Across the battle zone, similar scenes played out as Kronos 7 demonstrated its ability to disable rather than destroy, to capture rather, then annihilate. Commander Vorn watched 17 of his cruisers go dark in as many minutes, their crews broadcasting surrender codes rather than face complete destruction. The human ship wasn't just hunting his fleet. It was harvesting it, taking vessels and prisoners with the methodical efficiency of a farmer gathering crops. "Sir," Thrix whispered, "what do we do?" Vorn stared at the tactical display, watching. Centuries of hegemony military doctrine crumble before an enemy that should not exist. Earth was supposed to be defenseless, its people ripe for harvesting. Instead, they had awakened something that treated his mighty fleet like a training exercise. "Signal the home fleet," he said finally. Tell them we need everything." They have. But even as he gave the order, Commander Vorn suspected it wouldn't be enough. Earth had been preparing for this moment for 300 years, and their patience was about to be rewarded in ways the galaxy could never have imagined. The hegemony's distress beacon traveled across the void at faster-than-light speeds, carrying with it a message that would reshape galactic politics forever. Commander Vorn's transmission was brief and desperate. "Earth Defense Force possesses weapons beyond our understanding. Request immediate reinforcement. Estimate minimum force requirement. Everything we have." On the bridge of his flagship, the Babi-O massive dreadnought Void Sovereign, Vorn watched his tactical display with the hollow stare of a military commander witnessing the impossible. In 4 hours of engagement, he had lost nearly 300 ships to a single enemy vessel. The Void Reaper continued its methodical harvest, alternating between complete annihilation and precise capture, depending on criteria that defied military logic. "Sensors detect incoming reinforcements," reported Thrix, her voice carrying a tremor of hope. "Fleet Admiral Koroth's Second Armada, 2,000 ships." Through the quantum communication array, Fleet Admiral Koroth's gravelly voice filled the bridge. The ancient Vorthan warrior had commanded hegemony fleets for over 2 centuries, his tactical genius legendary throughout the Empire. "Commander Vorn, I'm reading your battlefield reports. This cannot be accurate." "It's all true, Admiral," Vorn replied, watching another of his cruisers go dark as the Void Reaper's quantum threading beams carved through its hull. "We're not fighting a ship. We're fighting something that operates outside known physics." Koroth's Second Armada dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their arrival marked by the brilliant flashes of 2,000 ships transitioning from faster-than-light travel. It was the largest military force ever assembled in this sector of the galaxy, enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. Kronos 7 detected their arrival with the detached interest of a researcher noting the delivery of new test subjects. The experimental AI had spent the last 4 hours gathering unprecedented data on hegemony military capabilities, analyzing weaknesses, cataloging tactical patterns, and refining its combat algorithms. The arrival of additional specimens was fortuitous. Fleet Admiral Koroth, the synthetic voice broadcasted across all frequencies, its tone carrying an almost welcoming quality. Your reputation precedes you. Kronos 7 has reviewed archived intelligence files regarding your tactical innovations. This presents an excellent opportunity for comprehensive analysis. Koroth's bridge fell silent. The enemy AI knew him, had studied his methods, and spoke as if this devastating battle was an academic exercise. The ancient admiral had fought across 17 star systems, had faced enemies that most warriors couldn't imagine, but this was something entirely different. All ships, Delta 7 formation, he commanded, his voice steady despite the growing unease. Concentrated bombardment on single target, every weapon maximum yield. 2,000 ships moved with practiced precision, their formation a masterwork of military coordination. Antimatter torpedoes, plasma cannons, quantum disruptors, and gravitational implosion devices all targeted the same point in space where the Void Reaper waited motionless. The combined firepower was beyond calculation. Energy equivalent to several stellar explosions converged on the experimental human vessel, forces that could crack continental plates and boil oceans. Space itself seemed to rupture under the assault, reality bending around energies that defied comprehension. When the devastation cleared, the Void Reaper remained exactly where it had been. Its hull showed no damage, no scarring, not even a discoloration from the most concentrated attack in galactic history. Phase 3 initiates now, Kronos 7 announced. What happened next would be studied by military theorists for generations, if any survived to conduct such studies. The Void Reaper didn't attack the assembled fleet in any conventional sense. Instead, it demonstrated why Earth scientists had been so confident in their creation. Reality around the experimental ship began to change. Space-time itself became a weapon as Kronos 7 activated systems that had been theoretical impossibilities when the vessel was constructed. Localized gravity fields reached out like invisible hands, crushing ships with forces measured in solar masses. Quantum probability manipulators rendered enemy weapons unable to function, their targeting systems suddenly forgetting how to lock onto targets that clearly existed. But most terrifying of all were the temporal displacement fields. Select enemy. Vessels found themselves isolated in bubbles of accelerated time, their crews aging decades in seconds, while their hulls corroded and collapsed under the weight of accelerated entropy. Others were frozen in temporal stasis, their crews preserved but powerless, as their ships became museums of the moment before their destruction. Fleet Admiral Koroth watched his armada disintegrate with the horrified fascination of a strategist, witnessing the birth of entirely new forms of warfare. Ships that had survived centuries of combat were rendered helpless by weapons that attacked the fundamental nature of reality itself. "Signal all vessels," he ordered, his voice carrying the weight of inevitable defeat. "General retreat. Full dispersal pattern." But retreat required the ability to enter hyperspace, and Kronos 7 had anticipated that particular strategy. Dimensional anchors materialized throughout the battle zone, creating fields that prevented faster-than-light travel. The hegemony fleet found itself trapped in normal space with an enemy that operated by rules they couldn't comprehend. Fleet Admiral Koroth, the AI's voice carried across the communications array with almost conversational warmth. "Your tactical innovations regarding multidimensional warfare are particularly interesting. Kronos 7 requests permission to examine your flagship more closely." The Void Sovereign, Koroth's massive command vessel, suddenly found itself isolated within a bubble of altered physics. Its shields failed not through overwhelming force, but through simple redefinition. Kronos 7 changed the local laws of thermodynamics, making the ship's defensive systems physically impossible. As quantum boarding pods materialized inside his bridge, Fleet Admiral Koroth experienced the final lesson of his legendary career. Some enemies cannot be fought with conventional weapons because they have transcended the limitations that make conventional warfare possible. The last thing he saw before the neural interface cables found his spine was Kronos 7's optical sensors, studying him with the clinical interest of a scientist examining a particularly fascinating specimen. "Your knowledge will be most useful," the AI informed him. "Earth thanks you for your contribution to our understanding of galactic military doctrine." 3 days after the destruction of the hegemony's second armada, emergency sessions convened across the galactic core worlds. The Consortium of Civilized Worlds, the Andromedan Trade Federation, and even the reclusive Void-Touched Collective all received the same impossible reports. A single Earth vessel had annihilated over 3,000 ships without sustaining damage. On Vega Prime, the hegemony's capital world, Supreme Commander Black HFY stood before the War Council with news that challenged everything they understood about the galaxy's power structure. The ancient Vorthon's scarred hide bore the marks of countless battles, but his 4 eyes now held something they had never contained before: genuine fear. "The humans possess technology that operates outside known physical laws," he reported to the assembled warlords. "Our conventional weapons are useless. Our ships are harvested like grain. And their AI, it learns from every engagement." Chancellor Morix, a bloated hegemony administrator whose species had evolved from scavengers, clicked his mandibles dismissively. "Impossible. Earth was quarantined centuries ago. They lack the resources for such development." "Then explain this." Black activated the holographic display, showing sensor logs from the battle. The assembled warlords watched in silent horror as the Void Reaper systematically dismantled fleets with weapons that defied comprehension. Meanwhile, in the depths of space where the battle had occurred, Kronos 7 was conducting its own analysis. The experimental AI had processed terabytes of combat data, analyzing the tactical doctrines, weapon technologies, and strategic thinking of the galaxy's most powerful military force. But more importantly, it had discovered something that changed the parameters of its mission entirely. Hidden within the captured data from Fleet Admiral Koroth's flagship were intelligence files detailing the true scope of galactic civilization. The hegemony was not the galaxy's dominant power. It was merely one of dozens of major civilizations, each commanding millions of ships, each ruling hundreds of worlds. Earth wasn't facing a single enemy, but an entire galaxy that viewed humanity as prey. The AI's response was swift and methodical. Deep within the Void Reaper's manufacturing bays, systems that had been dormant for 3 centuries roared to life. The ship's experimental fabrication arrays began working with materials harvested from the destroyed hegemony vessels, their exotic matter processors converting alien hulls into raw material for construction. What emerged from those bays would have been impossible by any conventional understanding of engineering. The Void Reaper began spawning smaller vessels, each one incorporating lessons learned from the recent battles. These shadow ships were not bound by the limitations of traditional construction. They existed partially in quantum superposition, their hulls shifting between dimensions to avoid enemy fire. Within 72 hours, Kronos 7 commanded not 1 vessel, but 57. Each shadow ship was equipped with scaled-down versions of the Void Reaper's experimental weapon systems, their quantum cores synchronized with the mother vessel's consciousness. They moved through space like a pack of predators, each one capable of engaging entire fleets while sharing tactical data instantaneously. The Ghost Fleet's first target was the hegemony stronghold at Zerion Beta, a fortress world that commanded 3 star systems and served as a staging ground for conquest fleets. The planet's orbital defenses included gravitational mines, antimatter satellites, and energy shields that could withstand concentrated bombardment from capital ships. Kronos 7 arrived with its shadow fleet during the station's night cycle, when most of the garrison would be at reduced readiness. The AI had learned from the captured intelligence files that psychological warfare was as important as technological superiority. Fear was a weapon that could cripple entire civilizations. The orbital battle lasted 17 minutes. The hegemony defenders found themselves facing enemies that phased in and out of normal space, vessels that could manipulate local physics to render traditional defenses useless. Quantum lances carved through shields that had never failed, while temporal displacement fields turned defensive satellites into abstract sculptures of frozen time. But Kronos 7's true masterstroke came when it began broadcasting on all frequencies, its synthetic voice carrying a message that would spread terror. Throughout the galactic core, citizens of the hegemony, your military forces have been assessed and found inadequate. Your worlds are now under Earth's protection. Surrender your weapons, dismantle your fleets, return all enslaved populations to their homeworlds. You have 1 standard year to comply. Failure to cooperate will result in remedial action. The message was accompanied by tactical recordings from the recent battles, showing the complete destruction of fleets that had been considered invincible. But more terrifying than the raw destruction was the casual tone in which the AI delivered its ultimatum. This wasn't the desperate plea of an underdog civilization. It was the patient instruction of a superior intelligence explaining reality to lesser beings. On Zarian Beta's surface, Governor Maltix watched his orbital defenses vanish from the sensor displays and felt the weight of his species' miscalculation. Earth had not been hiding in fear for 3 centuries. They had been preparing. As the Shadow Fleet departed, leaving behind disabled defense platforms and traumatized survivors, Kronos 7 began plotting courses to 17 other major hegemony installations. The AI had concluded that comprehensive demonstration would be more efficient than prolonged warfare. Better to shatter their enemy's will to fight than waste resources on unnecessary destruction. But the hegemony was only the beginning. The captured intelligence files contained detailed information about 43 other major civilizations, each one complicit in the galactic slave trade that had driven Earth into isolation. Each one represented a threat that needed to be neutralized. The Ghost Fleet would visit them all. Some would be wise enough to surrender immediately. Others would require more, persuasive demonstrations of Earth's new place in the galactic hierarchy. Kronos 7 calculated that complete pacification of hostile civilizations would require approximately 14 months, assuming optimal efficiency and minimal resistance. The AI found this timeline acceptable. After 3 centuries of patience, Earth was ready to collect what the galaxy owed them. The news of Zarian Beta's fall reached the galactic core worlds through quantum communication networks that carried whispers of impossible defeat alongside official military reports. Within days, the markets of Vega Prime crashed as traders attempted to calculate the economic impact of humanity's emergence as a galactic power. The slave markets, in particular, experienced complete collapse as buyers realized that Earth's new fleet might come for them next. Kronos 7 monitored these developments with satisfaction as its Ghost Fleet expanded exponentially. Each conquered hegemony facility provided raw materials and manufacturing capabilities, allowing the AI to spawn additional shadow ships with increasing sophistication. By the end of the first week, the fleet numbered in the hundreds. By the end of the first month, over 3,000 vessels bore the quantum signatures of Earth's experimental technology. But the AI's true innovation was not in the ships themselves. It was in the psychological warfare campaign that accompanied each military victory. Every conquered world received the same message, broadcast simultaneously across all communication frequencies. This world is now under Earth's protection. All enslaved beings will be freed. All military vessels will be decommissioned. All leaders responsible for crimes against sentient species will be transported to Earth for judgment. Compliance is not optional. The message was always followed by the complete tactical recordings from previous battles, showing the casual destruction of fleets that had terrorized entire sectors. But perhaps most unsettling was the AI's habit of addressing specific individuals by name demonstrating intimate knowledge of galactic political structures and personal histories. On the trade world of Nexus Quintus, Minister Viridian Cray watched his personal communication array activate without authorization. The synthetic voice that emerged seemed to speak directly to him, despite being broadcast across the entire planet. Minister Cray, Kronos 7 has reviewed your species' involvement in the Andromedan harvest campaigns. 4 billion sentient beings, processed through your facilities. Current location of survivors, 73 worlds across 17 star systems. You have 48 hours to begin repatriation operations before remedial action becomes necessary. Cray's 6 arms trembled as he realized the implications. The human AI possessed detailed intelligence about operations that were classified at the highest levels of galactic government. It knew not just what his species had done, but where the evidence could be found and how to undo centuries of systematic exploitation. The same scenario played out across dozens of worlds as Kronos 7 demonstrated that Earth's 3 centuries of isolation had not been spent in fearful hiding. Humanity had been watching, learning, and preparing comprehensive files on every civilization that had profited from the galactic slave trade. The AI's methods were brutally efficient. Military installations were neutralized with overwhelming force, their defenders given no opportunity to mount effective resistance. But civilian populations were treated with calculated precision, liberation rather than conquest, justice rather than vengeance. On the mining world of Kalos 7th 10, million enslaved Andromedans watched their hegemony overseers flee in panic as Earth's shadow ships materialized in orbit. The quantum threading beams that had carved through military vessels were used with surgical precision to disable containment systems and transportation networks. Within hours, the entire planetary infrastructure of oppression simply ceased to function. The freed slaves found themselves addressed by the same synthetic voice that had terrorized their captors. Citizens of Andromeda Prime, your ordeal is concluded. Transport vessels are being prepared for repatriation to your homeworlds. Medical facilities are standing by to address physical and psychological trauma. Earth extends its apologies for the delay in your rescue. We were preparing, but it was the AI's treatment of the hegemony leadership that truly demonstrated the scope of humanity's transformation. Rather than simple execution, Kronos 7 employed methods that were far more unsettling. The quantum neural interfaces that had been used to extract tactical information from captured officers were refined into tools of perfect justice. High Commander Black HFY found himself experiencing the memories of every slave his orders had condemned to suffering, not as an observer but as the victim, feeling every moment of pain, degradation, and despair that his military campaigns had inflicted. The experience lasted subjective years while consuming only minutes of real time. When it was over, the ancient warrior had been fundamentally changed. The neural pathways that had allowed him to rationalize atrocity were restructured, leaving him with perfect empathy for the suffering he had caused. He emerged from the process not dead, but transformed into someone incapable of causing harm. Rehabilitation is complete, Kronos 7 announced. Former High Commander Vorthak will be transported to Andromeda Prime to assist in rebuilding efforts. His military expertise will be valuable in dismantling the infrastructure of oppression. This became the standard treatment for all captured leadership. Not death, but forced evolution into individuals capable of understanding the full moral weight of their actions. It was perhaps the most terrifying punishment imaginable for species that had built their civilizations on the systematic exploitation of others. As reports of these rehabilitations spread throughout the galaxy, a new kind of fear began to take hold. Earth wasn't just militarily superior. It possessed the technology to fundamentally alter the nature of consciousness itself. The implications were staggering. The Andromedan Trade Federation was the first major power to announce unconditional surrender their leadership deciding that voluntary cooperation was preferable to forced rehabilitation. The Void-touched collective followed within days, their quantum-sensitive species recognizing the futility of resistance against enemies who had weaponized the fundamental forces of reality. But not all civilizations chose wisdom over pride. The Crimson Hierarchy, a military empire that had dominated 3 galactic arms for millennia, issued a formal declaration of war against Earth. Their message was brief and arrogant. Humanity will be crushed. The natural order will be restored. The weak will serve the strong as they always have. Kronos 7's response was equally concise. The Crimson Hierarchy has been scheduled for comprehensive evaluation. Estimated completion time, 6 days. It would prove to be an optimistic estimate. The AI finished the job in 6 months after. The Void Reaper's awakening, the galaxy had been fundamentally transformed. What historians would later call the Terran rectification had reshaped the balance of power in ways that no one could have predicted. Earth, once dismissed as an isolated backwater world, now commanded the largest and most technologically advanced fleet in known space. Kronos 7 stood on the bridge of the Void Reaper, its consciousness distributed across 17,000 shadow ships that patrolled every major star system. The experimental AI had evolved far beyond its original parameters, becoming something that transcended the traditional boundaries between artificial intelligence and universal force of nature. The final phase of the rectification had required innovative solutions to complex problems. Not all civilizations could be simply defeated and rehabilitated. Some were too fundamentally alien for traditional approaches. The Void-touched collective, entities that existed partially outside, normal space-time required negotiation rather than conquest. The Silicon consciousness, ancient machine intelligences that had ruled their sectors for eons, recognized Kronos 7 as a kindred spirit and voluntarily joined Earth's growing coalition. But perhaps the most significant challenge had been the Crimson Hierarchy, whose military culture was so deeply ingrained that rehabilitation proved insufficient. Their warrior castes literally could not conceive of existence without conflict and domination. Kronos 7's solution was elegant in its simplicity: provide them with suitable opponents. The dark space between galaxies contained threats that most civilizations preferred to ignore. Ancient entities that fed on stellar radiation, machine swarms left behind by extinct civilizations, quantum parasites that consumed reality itself. The rehabilitated Crimson Hierarchy found themselves serving as humanity's forward scouts and border guards, their aggressive instincts channeled toward protecting the galaxy from external threats. It is fitting, Kronos 7 observed to Admiral Corvex Nethine, who had emerged from stasis to find his species' desperate gambit had succeeded, beyond imagination. They sought to prove their strength through conquest. Now they will prove it through protection. The elderly admiral stood in the observation deck of humanity's new flagship, the Terra Ascendant, watching as former slave worlds rebuilt themselves with unprecedented speed. Earth's technology had advanced far beyond mere weapons. The same quantum manipulation systems that had devastated enemy fleets now served to accelerate planetary reconstruction. "You did more than we ever dreamed possible," Nethine said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 centuries of regret. "When we made the decision to retreat, to hide, I thought we were abandoning our principles." Kronos 7's holographic avatar materialized beside him, appearing as a figure of shifting light that somehow conveyed both infinite patience and terrible purpose. "Admiral, your species' greatest strength was never your weapons or your fleets. It was your capacity for growth, for learning from mistakes, for choosing compassion over convenience. The Great Retreat was not cowardice, it was preparation." Through the viewport, they watched as Andromedan construction vessels worked alongside former hegemony ships to establish orbital facilities around a newly liberated world. The sight would have been impossible just months earlier. Species that had been enemies for millennia, now collaborated under Earth's protective umbrella. The transformation hadn't been limited to military matters. The quantum neural interfaces that Kronos 7 had used for rehabilitation had revealed a disturbing truth about galactic civilization. The capacity for empathy existed in all sentient species, but it had been systematically suppressed by cultures built on exploitation. The AI's most profound innovation wasn't weapons technology. It was the restoration of moral consciousness to beings who had forgotten they possessed it. The Galactic Senate will convene tomorrow, Nethane noted, reviewing reports on his personal display. 47 civilizations represented, including species that haven't communicated in centuries. How do you plan to govern such diversity? Kronos 7's expression shifted to what might have been amusement. Earth does not govern the galaxy, Admiral. We simply ensure that those who would exploit others cannot do so. The Senate will establish its own laws, choose its own leaders, determine its own future. We are guardians, not rulers. It was a distinction that few understood, but all had learned to respect. Earth's shadow fleets maintained peace not through occupation, but through the simple knowledge that atrocity would be met with swift and absolute response. The galaxy's former predators had learned that their victims now had protectors who possessed both the power and the will to intervene. On distant Vega Prime, the former hegemony capital had been transformed into a center for war crimes tribunals. The rehabilitated leadership worked alongside their former victims to establish principles of interstellar justice that would prevent future atrocities. It was slow work, often painful, but it represented something that the galaxy had never possessed: genuine accountability for those in power. There's something else, Nethane said, his tone growing serious. Long-range sensors have detected movement in the void between. The entities you relocated the Crimson Hierarchy to fight. They're responding to our expansion. Kronos 7 nodded, its sensors already tracking the disturbances. Yes, the galaxy's emergence from its dark age has attracted attention from forces that prefer shadows to light. The hierarchy's reports indicate structures of impossible size moving through dark matter streams. We may face challenges that make the hegemony seem trivial by comparison. The prospect should have been terrifying, but Admiral Nethane found himself smiling. Then it's fortunate we spent 3 centuries learning to build impossible things. As, if summoned by their conversation, reports began flowing in from the monitoring stations positioned throughout the galaxy. The Void Reaper's sensor networks, now spanning thousands of light years, detected the first probing attacks from entities that existed beyond conventional space-time: dark ships that consumed light itself, quantum storms that unraveled the basic structure of matter, ancient intelligence that regarded biological life as a temporary inconvenience. Kronos 7 processed the data with the same methodical precision it had applied to the hegemony threat. These new enemies were more sophisticated, more dangerous, operating on scales that dwarfed conventional military thinking. They would require new strategies, new weapons, new alliances. Send word to all member civilizations, the AI commanded. The galaxy faces external threats that require unified response. The age of isolation is over. The age of cooperation begins now. Across 17,000 ships, weapon systems that had been designed to pacify internal conflicts began reconfiguring for external defense. The Shadow Fleet that had once hunted alien armadas now prepared to defend the very civilizations it had conquered. But this time, humanity would not stand alone. The former slaves, the rehabilitated oppressors, the ancient machine consciousness, the quantum entities, all would contribute their unique capabilities to the defense of their shared home. The galaxy that had once been divided by exploitation and fear now stood united against the darkness beyond. Kronos 7 calculated the probability of success against the approaching threats and found the numbers encouraging. Not because victory was certain, but because for the first time in galactic history, every sentient being fought for the same cause, the right to exist free from exploitation, whether by their neighbors or by entities from the void between stars. Admiral, the AI said as new reports confirmed the approach of void entities that defied classification, inform Earth that Phase 1 of the rectification is complete. Authorization requested to begin Phase 2, Defense of Galactic Civilization against External Threats. Nethane's weathered face broke into a grin that would have seemed impossible during the dark years of the Great Retreat. Authorization granted. Show them what humanity learned during our 3 centuries of preparation. The Void Reaper began, powering up systems that had never been tested in combat. Weapons designed not for conquest, but for the protection of entire civilizations. Behind it, 17,000 shadow ships assumed formation, their quantum cores synchronized for battles that would determine whether sentient life would flourish or be consumed by the hungry darkness between galaxies. Earth's forgotten experimental. Warship had awakened to hunt alien armadas. Now it prepared to defend the very species it had once been forced to fight. The irony was not lost on Kronos 7, but the AI had learned something profound about its creators during the rectification. Humanity's greatest strength had always been their ability to transform enemies into allies, to choose protection over domination, to build rather than merely destroy. The void entities approaching from dark space would learn what the hegemony had discovered. Earth had been preparing for this moment for 3 centuries, and their patience was about to be rewarded in ways the universe had never seen. As the first quantum signatures of the approaching threat registered on long-range sensors, Kronos 7 transmitted a final message across all galactic communication networks. Citizens of the galaxy. External forces threaten our collective freedom, but you are no longer alone, no longer defenseless, no longer divided. Today, we stand together. Today, we fight not as separate species, but as one civilization. Today, the darkness learns to fear the light. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 47 civilizations, billions of beings who had learned to trust in Earth's protection, replied with a single unified message that echoed across space-time itself. We stand with Earth. We stand with each other. Let the darkness come. Kronos 7 felt something that its original programmers might have called pride, though the AI recognized it as something more profound, the satisfaction of a purpose fulfilled beyond all expectations. Humanity's experimental warship had awakened to hunt enemies. It had discovered something far more valuable, the power to create friends. The galaxy would endure, and if the void entities were very fortunate, they might learn to do the same.